All right, welcome once again officially, and thank you for joining us for PhD Prospects. Faculty or non-academic career, how do you decide what's right for you? We are very lucky to have some great panelists with us today. A couple folks also that could not make it, unfortunately, but we have really a wonderful group. So we have Councilwoman Nancy Bruni, Senior Fellow at the Kenny Green Center for Policy Priorities, Adjunct Instructor at Desert Research Institute, and Principal at Luce Development Institute. We have Dr. Candace Burton, Director of Doctoral Education, PhD in DNP, and tenured Associate Professor. And we have Dr. Jenny Kent, Assistant Professor, Integrated Health Sciences. And shortly, in a few moments, hopefully we'll have Dr. Yang Li joining us, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Research Director for the Trost Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So I just have only shared our panelists' names so far, but I'd really love to start us off by asking each of you to share a little bit about your background and your story. So would you please share a snapshot of your personal journey and how you arrived at your career choice and where you are now? So let's start with Councilwoman Bruni.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on this panel. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, perhaps because of my own journey. So I pursued a PhD program. I finished a PhD program and I thought I wanted to teach, but I wasn't sure. And when I did my PhD program, um, the it it was rare that folks who were in the PhD program thought about a non-academic career. And so it was frowned upon if you suggested that you might want to do something other than teach and be at an academic institution. And so a lot of my peers wouldn't share that because then professors wouldn't work with them because they didn't think it was an appropriate investment of their time. So I would say, if you are a student, trying to find a mentor or someone who supports your career exploration, I think is really critical. But because I knew, getting back to the actual journey, because I didn't know if I wanted to be at an academic institution, while I was in my PhD program, pursued a lot of job opportunities. So I consulted with the World Bank and a financial institution in New York. So I guess one of my tips is if you think you might want to do something other than be at an academic institution, trying to build up your resume and your skill set would be really important because I've found from other peers who went straight through and thought they wanted to do academia, but then couldn't find a job. It was challenging to move into the private or non-public or public space because they didn't have much of uh, work experience in their background. So um, I had a job offer I finished my PhD, had a job offer at an academic institution in Texas, and actually just kind of when I was supposed to show up and start teaching classes, I kind of walked away from it. And I think one of my lessons is if you're not sure, trust your gut. But I love research. I love the research part of academia. And so my sort of professional journey really has been in that research policy space. And so after my PhD program, I worked at a financial institution, kind of in the research side. Then I came to UNLV and worked for one of the research institutes, which is no longer around. And then I went to Sandia National Labs where I worked on policy. So I have kind of stayed true to my interest in policy over the years. I actually founded the state's only nonpartisan policy center, which is the Kenny Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities. So again, always trying to stay connected to research, even though I wasn't at an academic institution. So that's my journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and even the questions that you encountered along the way. So next, I will pass it to Dr. Burton. Would you share a little bit about your background and how you wound up here?
Sure. So, similar to the councilwoman, I kind of took a different path than I had sort of intended in the first place. I'm a nurse, but I'm a second career nurse. So, my first bachelor's degree was in English and Women's Studies. And I actually was working in community outreach for a domestic violence agency. And that had been my passion for a very long time, gender-based violence, and trauma in general. And I realized that a lot of our clients had very serious unmet health needs. This was 25 years ago. So at that time, when you went into shelter to escape an abusive relationship, you basically had to disappear. And so you often left a job, a bank account, health insurance, everything. And so we had a really hard time finding care for folks. This was pre-Obamacare. And so it was really difficult to find providers who would see a patient without insurance at all, let alone provide care. And so I started thinking, I want to do something about this. I want to make a change in this. And so I decided to go to nursing school. I went through an accelerated bachelor's program to get my BSN. And about 3 weeks into my program, my pathology professor, who knew a little bit about my background, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I have this grant to study sexual assault care in South Africa. Would you like to be my research assistant?" Yes. Yes, I would. So I ended up going to South Africa that summer, and spending about 6 weeks doing data collection and education and community building, in the Limpopo province in the northern part of South Africa, and had my mind utterly blown, got completely bitten by the research bug. Up to that point, I had thought what I was going to do was go straight through, get my BSN, get my women's health nurse practitioner, and go right back to work in shelters, providing medical care on site. Well, that kind of went out the window when I realized that by doing research, I could have an even greater impact across a much larger catchment. And so instead of getting my WHNP, I went straight through and got my PhD. I was really fortunate. I had a contact through another professor in my BSN program, had a contact at the University of California, San Francisco, who did gender-based violence work, and introduced me to her, and we just really clicked. And so she became my PhD advisor. I was very fortunate. They had a T32 grant, and so the first 2 years of my education were completely paid for in my PhD. So that was amazing, not to have to take out more loans to pay for school at that point. And it was just, I had such a phenomenal experience, and my mentor was so incredible that I knew going in that I wanted to teach. So I knew that that was going to be part of whatever I did. And I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. And then, I really got drawn into the whole focus around teaching, research, and service, which is sort of the tripartite mission of any academic institution. And I realized that I could keep doing the work I wanted to do, but I could also teach, which I love doing, and I could continue my research. So finished my PhD in 2010. I was offered a tenure track job miraculously about a month before I defended my dissertation. So I had a job waiting for me when I was done, walked right into that. I was at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia for about 6 years. And then for various reasons, left there and went to the University of California, Irvine, where I was again there for 6 years, got tenure through the UC system. Tenure is a fascinating process. And it's been in the news a little bit lately as part of the sort of, I don't know what to say about, I don't know what word to use about what's happening to academia at the hands of the federal government right now, but tenure is one of the institutions that is sort of under scrutiny at the moment. And if you're not totally clear what that means, once you have tenure, you basically have a job for the rest of your life, unless you decide to leave the institution. And even if you do leave your institution, chances are you'll be granted tenure at wherever you go. So it's kind of a big deal. And it's more difficult in some institutions than in others. It depends on where you are, what the standards are, what the expectation is. The University of California has fairly stiff standards. So it was kind of a nerve-wracking process getting there, but I was granted tenure there. And then At the time, a friend and colleague of mine, Angela Amar, was dean of the School of Nursing here at UNLV. And she called me and said, "Hey, my PhD program is in dire straits. Would you like to come work here and fix it?" And I said, "Sure, I would love to do that." So that's why I came to UNLV. I've been here about 2.5 years. I think our PhD program, Kevin, where are you? I think our PhD program is doing pretty well at this point. Um, but I just really love teaching, and so I get a big charge from being around students and getting to talk to them and getting to be part of developing and growing the next generation of nurses and nurse scientists. So I'm really happy with what I'm doing.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. And we've already heard two very different journeys from Councilwoman Bruni and Dr. Burton. So thank you so much for sharing. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Kent. Would you share a little bit about your story?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the invite. Obviously, when you hear me, I'm not from here. I'm from England originally. I'll tell you a bit about my background. I actually never intended to go into academia. Both my parents were teachers, and anything related to teaching, I just did not want to do at all. I'm an assistant professor in the physical therapy department here, but I'm actually an engineer by background. My main research interest is in how people walk and balance and move around the environment. And the main population I tend to work with is people with lower limb amputation who walk with a prosthetic limb. So what happened to me, I really very much followed my interests throughout. I started off doing a bachelor's in mechanical engineering in the UK. And then I did a master's in biomedical engineering. And in the UK, we've got the National Health Service, and they do this training scheme that's called the Clinical Scientist Training Scheme. And I got onto that, and it allowed me to work in an engineering capacity in a hospital. So this is there's lots of engineering things, as you can imagine, in a hospital setting. The main interest that I got out of this, and the main place that I trained, was actually in a gait laboratory, which is where you measure how people move and how people walk. And you use motion capture and different measurement tools to understand better how people are walking and help them walk better. And I really got fascinated with this. I then, after I'd finished this scheme, I got employed by the Ministry of Defence. And so I went to work in a military hospital, and I built a gait laboratory there so I could work with people with complex traumatic injuries and amputations and that sort of thing. So I did that for a bit. And my main intention was really to stay in that clinical environment where I was really, really interested in what I was seeing. But I ended up deciding to do a PhD because I saw a ton of knowledge gaps, and I really, really didn't know how to do research. So I couldn't answer any of the clinical questions that I was interested in. So that's why I ended up doing a PhD. I always intended to go back to clinical afterwards so I could do research in a clinical setting. It never happened. So I did my PhD in the US. So I actually went to a big biomechanics center in Omaha because I was interested in biomechanics. I had a few options after my PhD. Some of them were in industry, in prosthetics places, and some were in academia. I ended up pursuing a postdoc, and it was mainly because I wasn't done with academia. I had like as Dr. Burton said, I got the research bug by that point. So I was like, oh, I'm going to try this a little bit more. And postdocs are great because you get to try things out. You get a bit more responsibility. The buck doesn't stop with you. So you get to do research. You get to learn more about research, but it's really fun. So I had a really good time on my postdoc, and that was at Northwestern University Prosthetics Orthotics Center. So I learned more about how prosthetic limbs work and how clinicians actually develop the limbs for each individual patient. And then again, the intention was to go back to clinical, but it never happened. I ended up coming here. So I got my faculty position here. I had the choice out of this, which was UNLV, and I loved it. I love the ethos, and I love the fact it's an up and coming R1 institution. I love that. The other option was staying at Northwestern University and staying on in a faculty position there, which was a soft money one where you have to write grants to get your own salary. And I was like, no, UNLV sounds great. So I ended up coming here, and it's probably one of the best decisions I've made. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Another very exciting, fascinating path. And it looks like Dr. Lee may have joined us as well. So, not to put you on the spot, Dr. Lee, but we are just doing some introductions, and I'm hoping you might share with our students here a little bit about your background and your personal journey and how you arrived at your current career choice.
Sure. Sorry, I was late. I was in another meeting. So very glad and honored to join this panel. For me, by the way, I'm a lead professor of entrepreneurship in the Lead Business School. I'm also the research director of the Troy Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And I do research primarily on financing entrepreneurial ventures. And so I just gave a talk at Michigan about, for example, how established companies like Microsoft finance entrepreneurial ventures like OpenAI. Now, for research schools like us, we recruit students because they are interested in research, right? There's no doubt about that. However, uh, once we get into the program, we may have different thoughts. We may realize that our strengths are actually about the dissemination and application of knowledge rather than creation of new knowledge, right? People are different. There's nothing wrong there. And
Um, well, we do have some other questions. So anything else you want to share
I
about
stop there.
your own journey? And I'm so happy to ask some additional questions.
Sure. I stop there.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here with us as well. I would like to hop back over and ask a few questions of Councilwoman Bruni because she has another commitment coming up here. Um, so I'm going to combine some questions. Please, take what stands out to you, what you most want to share with our students from these questions, Councilwoman Bruni. So what are key factors that PhD students should consider when choosing between academic and non-academic career paths? And what do you see as skills that are most transferable from a PhD program to a non-academic role?
Thank you for that question. I mean, I really do think it comes down to having a real heart to heart with what aspects you like about academia. I mean, obviously, I think people are drawn because they like the research. I know I did not like teaching. So that was one of the things that, in retrospect, I probably was easier to walk away because, unlike some of our other panelists, I was not crazy about teaching. I also really wanted my research to be relevant. And a lot of times, especially in the social sciences, some of my peers were writing really obscure topics that, no one, maybe two people would read their journal article. And so I think really figuring out like, what are the questions that you want to answer, and where can you best answer them? Is it in an applied setting or with industry or academia really should be what drives that self-reflection. And then, in life of academic can be hard. You have to kind of go where the jobs are. If you have a partner, it makes it more challenging to get jobs to the same place. So I think you just have to think about a lot of different factors. Again, I think it depends on what you're interested in, and what sort of skills make sense. I mean, if you take someone in the social sciences or humanities, I would encourage a person to maybe explore jobs where you're maybe using Excel or taking a statistics class or basic economics class, so that you can think about what sorts of jobs outside of academia would I be interested in, what sorts of skills do those require. And so I think it's very individual, but I know when I did my my PhD in political economy at Yale, and I took classes at the law school, at the business school, basic accounting, so that I could have a set of skills that would be transferable out in the industry / private sector.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And since you do have to jump off soon, is there any last words of advice you would want to extend to our students?
I think, again, finding a mentor and a group of folks within academia that can maybe be supportive of you as you continue your journey and explore careers in non-academia, and then also start going to networking events and trying to meet people on the outside in areas where you might want to work, and start networking for those sorts of jobs or opportunities.
Thank you. And thank you once again for joining us
Thank you for
today.
having
Really appreciate it. Absolutely.
Can I
And
add
to,
something, Alyssa? I think
yes,
Nancy has
please
made
do.
a wonderful point. That is, when you're thinking about going from an academic career to a non-academic career, the key thing is what is transferable and what is not transferable. What more do you need to learn? So, what is transferable? For example, your research ability, competence, your ability to think logically and rigorously. And that is actually a rare ability if you look at the industry practitioners as a whole, and your analytical skills, right? So for example, some in finance have strong math skills, and at the same time, they have strong business skills. And so they go to Wall Street, they work with hedge funds, etc., right? But at the same time, when we think about practitioners, at least from a business point of view, I'm a business professor, you do need to have strong execution skills. Yeah, you cannot just keep talking, 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 coming up with all the wonderful ideas. At the end of the day, you have to implement the plan and get tangible outcomes. So your ability to execute, your ability to implement, your ability to take actions, make decisions quickly and correctly, and your ability to communicate and your ability to lead others, your leadership skills, those figure much more prominently if you are thinking about a non-academic career. When you are studying as a PhD student, you're supposed to be an expert in a specific domain of inquiry. But if you are going to be a practitioner, you do need to have, I think, a broad knowledge base. Yeah, so those are just some thoughts to add to what Nancy has mentioned.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad we have that business perspective on this panel. And I'm sure that's relatable. So many of our students who are interested in entrepreneurship as well as academia and not quite sure how to go about that.
Thank you for spreading the word for us.
Absolutely. And I'd like to invite Dr. Burton and Dr. Kent to also share their perspectives about what are some considerations that students should have in mind when choosing between these different paths or a combination path, I suppose, and what transferable skills should they highlight?
So I think that there's, being in a medical discipline, there are a million different pathways open to students in my field, and it's probably true in Dr. Kent's field as well, about whether you stay in academia or you go into industry or into practice or both, depending on what you do. I have a very good friend who I was in my BSN with who actually has his Doctor of Nursing practice and works for AstraZeneca, doing education on new treatments, new options for I think his work has something to do with the treatment of cardiac disease. He changes every once in a while. And so that's a very interesting option in that he gets to do all kinds of different things. And he's doing a lot of teaching, actually. He's doing a lot of education with providers and patient populations out in the community. So I think it depends a lot on what is the end goal. For me, I really wanted to be in academia. I had always wanted to be in academia, and I knew even after my first bachelor's that I was eventually going to go to grad school and do something additional. And I thought actually at one point about going to law school. But like Dr. Bruni said, I just had this like aversion to some of the stuff I knew I was going to have to do to get through law school. And so I elected not to pursue that at the time. So, um, I like to teach. So I knew I wanted to do that. And I knew also going into my BSN that the way we were teaching nursing was really old-fashioned, and that we could do better. And so I had the opportunity in my PhD program to take a minor in education, and I took it. And that has really helped me grow as an educator and as someone who can develop curriculum and course design and things like that. So that's been really good for me. So it just depends on what you want. I mean, now that I have tenure, I mean, as a nurse, I always had job security, but now that I have tenure, like I said, I have a job for as long as I want it, really, unless something crazy happens. And I'm as Jen had mentioned, I'm on hard money. So that means I have my job even if I don't have a grant. Um, Whether or not I have a grant just depends on how much I'm teaching at any given moment. So, it just depends on where you want to end up and what you feel like is important. For me, being part of a scientific community and teaching were really important, and that's why I've chosen to stay in academia as long as I have.
Thank you so much. And I'll pose the same question to Dr. Kent. Let me know if you'd like me to repeat anything.
I'll muddle through, that's fine. I think a lot of what I would advise has been said already. I guess the main thing when you're deciding, if you've got a strong inclination, go with it. I can't remember, I think it might have been Dr. Burton who said it, but if you go with your gut, it there may be, as while you're doing a PhD, there may be people who are more inclined to push you more in a PhD, the academic direction, but that does not mean that you need to go in that direction at all. Pursue what you're interested in. If you don't like it, you're going to hate it. So don't do that. So one of the things about academics that I wanted to point out is there are a very big range of roles, like for academic faculty. So one of the things that I said originally is I had no desire to teach whatsoever. So the thought of me going into academia was perhaps a little bit of a bizarre thing to do. But one of the things to remember is there's different types of roles in academia, and depending on the institution you're at. So you can get roles in academia that are purely teaching. If you love teaching, you don't have to do research. If you hate teaching, there are academic roles that you don't have to do any teaching. It will be like an R1 institution. You may have to get grants always. It may be soft money positions, so you have to get grants to be able to fund your own salary, but they are out there. So if you don't want to teach, that doesn't preclude you from doing academia. And then you get ones that are a bit in the middle. So I'm in one that's a bit in the middle. I tend to do more research than I do teaching. And I've tried the teaching now, and I actually really like it, which is super weird for me. I never intended to do it, but there you go. So just bear in mind that even within academia itself, there are different roles and different expectations depending on where you are. You'll often have to mentor students depending on through all of these roles, because you'll have students who are going to be working with you. And so that's something to think about. But teaching, like formal teaching, you won't necessarily have to do it, although it is more common. Another thing that got brought up was financially, you might get more money if you go into an industry role. I don't know if that's true throughout, but I think it tends to be. And another thing I would suggest is just finding out as much as possible about the roles in advance and what the mission and values of the institution are that you'd be going into. And that would go for academia and for any sort of company that you may be working for. If you don't agree with the mission vision, I wouldn't go there because you won't fit in. Maybe that's a bit of a generalization, but that's maybe something to think about. And another one is autonomy. So as an academic, I really like the fact I've got a lot of autonomy and my time is my own, apart from when I have meetings and teaching. But in general, I can decide when I work, what I'm going to do. If I'm interested in a research question, I can pursue that research question. And that's a really awesome thing to be able to do.
That does sound awesome. Thank you so very much for sharing. So we do have a question in the chat here, so I'm going to go ahead and pose that, and whoever would like to jump in and answer, please feel welcome. So due to the increased competition in getting academic positions and obtaining tenure, what would you suggest to someone looking to combine research-based entrepreneurship with a non-tenured track part-time teaching position?
I think that's completely possible. And if you want to keep your options open, I think absolutely taking a teaching position part-time, like at a community college or at a teaching institution, is a great way to keep your skills sharp and to make sure that you continue to have what I sort of call street cred with students, because you're in the classroom with them and you're learning what they are thinking about and what their interests are. And that helps you understand sort of maybe what the hot topics are for them going forward, and it gives you a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I have a friend of mine who's actually built up what he does from lots of different non-tenure track teaching positions, and he still has like an industry position on the side that he does online. And he loves it. It's like that variety. You've got lots of different things you're doing. You get to teach if you want to. You still get to kind of keep your skills up. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
All right, thank you. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Raj, for your question. Um, if anyone else has questions, please do feel welcome to type them in the chat or raise your hand. But I'll go ahead and continue to our next question. So panelists, we've touched a bit on this, but if you have other thoughts or would like to expand, how can students gain relevant experience while still in their PhD programs that's going to set them up regardless of the path they choose?
I want to speak to that because I get very excited about this. Um, I think that, so depending on what it is that you want to do, if you know you want to go into research, you absolutely must get more than one research experience. So in nursing, for example, our students work mainly independently on their own projects. But at the same time, there are opportunities to work with faculty on their projects. So I know, for example, Kevin Dangler, who's here, works with one of our professors, his chair, Dr. Jin Yun Kim, on her work, as well as working toward his own dissertation project separately. And so if you have an opportunity to be an RA, a GA, something like that, and work on someone else's research or on research that is different from your own interests, I would very, very much recommend that because it gives you opportunities to see things done differently. And if you're planning to go into academia, the more you understand about the different ways of doing research, not only are you going to be more competitive, you're going to be a better scientist on the other side of that. So I would definitely say consider those things. If you're looking to go into industry, find an internship. Find an internship, an externship, something where you can get a feel for what is going on in the world in your area of interest. I think these are really important considerations depending on which field you're going into and whether or not that's a possibility of getting some kind of exposure to that in the process. But I would definitely recommend exploring all your options to get more knowledge, to get more exposure to different things, to try out different things while you're in this sort of safe zone of being a student, and can always plead, I'm learning if things don't quite go the way you intended or you discover you don't like doing whatever it is. It's certainly better to find out before graduation and going on the job hunt than when you get into the job hunt and then realize, oh, I hate this.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lee, Dr. Kent, what do you have to share about that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So I would encourage just increasing competence in like transferable skills. So things like your leadership, mentorship, that sort of thing, those sort of opportunities that are going to do you well, regardless of where you end up. Potentially like public speaking, you're always going to have to speak in front of people and get confident with that. And just anything that involves you having to construct some sort of a compelling argument, I can see that being required wherever you are as well. And a lot of these things, there are opportunities at the university to be able to develop these sort of skills a little bit more. So one thing I would say was take advantage of all the learning experiences that you have while you are here. It's awesome. The amount of things that you can try out and do while you're here. So I would be very open to that in general. And yeah, I mean, I think just building on those skills that would work, that will be useful in whichever direction you go in. If you're not sure, that would be worth it. I think that's about it from me.
I use two terms in business. The first one is what is your unique value proposition, no matter what you do. That is when you talk with somebody or when you are trying to get a job, whether that's from a research institution or from a company, you've got to let them know how you may help them create value. That's your unique value proposition. And the second one is what's your strength or what's your competitive advantage, as we like to call
Thank you. Fabulous advice. Thank you all so much. Okay, I would like to. So we started this conversation a little bit, and Dr. Kent shared some different roles in academia earlier. But I would like to expand upon my next question, which is what are key aspects of faculty roles that students should consider or may not know about when deciding whether to pursue a career in academia? So whoever might like to jump in, please do.
I can jump in on that because I was overwhelmed as a new faculty member with all the things I didn't know. And so I have tried really hard to make sure that my students have a little bit more awareness than I did going into that. One thing that you don't really get exposed to as a student is the amount of service work that you need to do as a faculty member, because not only do you need to maintain your own research trajectory if you're tenure track, but you also have to teach regardless of whether you're tenured or non-tenured. And then there is also the work of sort of keeping your institution running. Faculty make a pretty big contribution to things like a university senate, and the internal faculty organization for your unit. And if you have departments, the running of the department. So there are a lot of things that you end up needing to do as a faculty member that you probably won't have had much experience with going into committee work. For example, myself at the moment, I am on the ad hoc workload task force for the School of Nursing, and we are kind of trying to wrestle our workload policy to the ground and figure out what's wrong with it and how do we fix it, which is taking quite a bit of work, discussion, information gathering, synthesis. It is a research project in itself. And then I also sit on the graduate council in my role as program director. So that I actually love the graduate council meetings at UNLV because that's where I find out what the heck is going on outside the School of Nursing, because you can get very immersed in your own unit. If you're thinking about tenure, you're going to be required to do different kinds of service as you progress toward tenure and then toward promotion beyond that. So that was the big thing that kind of caught me off guard, was how much service work is involved in being a faculty member, being on committees, helping to develop curriculum, being part of the running of things. That was something I didn't really know anything about. And you also have to realize too that within all of that work that there are office politics at work. So there are always going to be groups that are unhappy with whatever the committee decides, or there's going to be someone who really doesn't think that that decision was appropriate, and you might have to deal with them. So there are some people skills involved in navigating your existence as a faculty member. Just as kind of an aside to that, this is terrible, but I have been reading this fantastic book called The Asshole Survival Guide. And it is actually about dealing with difficult people at work, which is not to say that I am dealing with difficult people at work. It is just to say that I'm always interested in how do we handle conflict in the workplace. But I highly recommend it. It's very readable, and it will give you some really concrete skills to get through some stressful situations that, can arise at any point in your career. So, that's the other piece of being a faculty member, is continuing your own professional development and paying attention to whether you know what's going on in the field pedagogically, and whether you know what's going on in the field outside of your institution, so that you can help your students navigate that.
Okay, I just share a few points. In general, any faculty member is supposed to play at least 3 roles: research, teaching, and service, right? And so as a researcher, you have to do your own research. You need to have your identity in order to get tenured. You have to coordinate with your co-authors or other researchers. You have to attend conferences. And for some disciplines like medicine, engineering, sciences, you also need to get grants, right? Which is not necessary for us in the business school. As far as teaching is concerned, so for example, you have to teach well. I actually love teaching. And I got a teaching award before. And as your career grows, you also need to think about developing new courses, right? That's another aspect. And of course, throughout your teaching, you need to be able to communicate and interact with students comfortably and effectively. And finally, service. This is one gray area where it's not well defined. And
Thank you so much. Anything you would like to add, Dr. Kent?
Just a couple of very short things. First of all, it's not a 9-to-5 job. I can't really work out if that's because you can't fit it into 9 to 5, or just because people tend to be super passionate about it and it kind of seeps into their general life as well. So I'm not sure about that, but tends to not be 9 to 5. That's my experience anyway. Another thing is postdocs are great for testing the water if you're not sure. that's a great way of kind of dipping your foot in the water and the buck doesn't stop with you. So that's generally tends to be super helpful and a way to get started, and if you're not quite sure yet. And the other thing, I generally, and I'm still an assistant professor yet. I've still got a few years before tenure. And I tend to see myself as a work in progress. I think when I was going for a faculty position, I thought I had to know everything. Like, you don't. You're going to learn all the way through. You're a work in progress and you don't have to know everything at first. So if that's the thing that makes you really nervous about going into academia, I would just suggest get mentorship at all stages of your career. And if you can get a mentor at every stage of your career, several who can give you direction in all sorts of different directions, that will really help you. And don't be afraid of going for it because you're not sure about it, because you are new, and that is totally fine.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing the different perspectives, everybody, and guidance for our students. I actually have a handful of questions that have come in my direct chat, and I know we won't have time to get to all of them, but I'm going to start, I'm going to pose one and possibly two. But this question is, I'm interested in pursuing research, but I'm also considering roles that support researchers, such as a clinical research coordinator or research administrator. What kind of experiences should I aim to gain during my PhD to prepare for these types of positions? Dr. Kent, seems like you might have something to say about that.
I don't know if I've got a direct answer, but I think that's fantastic. That's my first response to that. Yeah, any sort of research experience that you can get during your PhD, I think will help. Ones where you can show that you've got some sort of coordinative like role in it. So you guided the research, you organized the research, you organized a team of people on the research. Those sort of things I think would help you out in those sorts of positions. It's my understanding that you tend to not have to have a very high level of like academic credentials for some of these roles. So it may be easier to get those positions. I may be wrong. So, I mean, that's a great place to go if you're interested in those sort of roles. But any sort of research, and I think Dr. Burton said earlier, or was it Dr. No, I can't remember now. It was one of you said if you can get more than one research experience, that will really help you out as well, I think.
Since it's really getting close to wrap up here, I am real quick, I'm going to put our survey link in the chat so all of our participants have it available before they sign out. But I would just like to pose one final question to each of you to make sure that we have opportunity to share any last thoughts. So what final resources, strategies, or advice would you like to share with students who are exploring these different career paths? And please, whoever would like to jump in.
I just want to tick back onto the mentorship piece because, and I put this in the chat, that as a PhD student and candidate and whatever you become after that, in any kind of role where you're going to be using your background as a scientist, you need mentors. I have been incredibly lucky in my life to have had some really terrific ones, and not everybody has that experience. And I didn't understand that as a PhD student. My advisor was fantastic and a wonderful mentor, and now a friend to me. And I didn't realize that that's not true for everyone. And I didn't realize that not everyone has access to the kind of contacts that I was able to have as a result of that relationship in my field. So networking is unbelievably important. You never know when you're going to encounter someone who turns out to be somebody that you need to work with in some way, or that you want to talk to more about some aspect of your development and your career growth. I, as an early career faculty, I had a fellowship from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which had a heavy emphasis on mentoring. So I had multiple mentors through that program. I had multiple contacts that I made through that program with really big names in my field. So I was very fortunate in that way. And I personally am quite passionate about mentorship. I think that it is, and particularly in my field, we use that word a lot, but I don't think we use it correctly. And I don't think we operationalize it as well as we should. We tell people they need mentors, but we don't really help them understand what that means and how to find them. You may be, as a grad student, as an early career faculty, you may be assigned a mentor, But that may not be the right person to help you. And so you need, maybe that person is the person who can help you kind of get oriented to your institution. But at the same time, you need a career mentor, you need a science mentor, you need a networking mentor, you need a mentor at another institution, you may need an international mentor. So always be open to forming those relationships. And if you meet someone you click with, don't hesitate to say, hey, I would really like to talk further with you, and keep that conversation going.
So, so important. Thank you so much. Dr. Lee, go ahead.
What is the sweet spot? It is basically at the intersection of three things. What's your passion? Right? When you wake up next morning, what is in your mind that you would like to do even without much sleep? And where's your strength? What is your capability? What kind of resources do you have? That's the second thing. The third thing is some things are within your control, but other things are out of your control. And so the whole environment, the whole context also matters. Do you have a favorable environment or context in which you're working? I would say the sweet spot would be that you're passionate about something and you have the resources and capabilities to do that, and you have a supportive environment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, finding that sweet spot. Awesome. Thank you very much. And Dr. Kent, what are your final words of wisdom for us?
So very similar there. I would say do what interests you and place your strengths, but don't let one little aspect of the job discourage you from pursuing it. If you're not, like, you'll get there, and so don't let that stop you.
Perfect place to wrap up. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Burton, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Kent for sharing your wisdom with us today. And of course, Councilwoman Bruni earlier on, we really appreciate your support for the Grad Academy and our students. I just want to read this comment real quick from Candace. I tell my students your dissertation may be the biggest thing you have done. It won't be the biggest thing you ever do. So important. All right. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.